Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Game Logic from the Rounding Off Infinity Gaming channel on YouTube, one of the co-hosts of the Enough to Keep Going Weekly Games podcast on the E2KG Network podcasting channel on YouTube, back with another episode of the Logic Files. This is episode number 4 for the 5th of August, 2025. We're going to be going over some news and topics in the gaming conversation this evening. So without much further ado, I think tonight going to be a little more newsly than last episode. And I apologize for being a few minutes late, but at least it was better than the 30 minutes late, 20 or 30 minutes late I was before last episode. So, and I think I will also remember to, at least I'll try to, get some background music going on, so when I need to take breaks, you guys aren't here in total silence. And as always, if my mic is too loud or too soft, or the music is too loud, just let me know. And thanks, welcome aboard to Soil Tech, Ghostface Killa, and E-Nate. Thanks so much for coming through. I appreciate you. First news story in the rundown is Valve responds to MasterCard blaming Steam's rules for controversial game delistings. And I find it funny to be tracking this story, E-Nate, because the first time I think we went over this on the Enough to Keep Going weekly gaming podcast, you were there and you were expressed some concern that this would snowball and pick up momentum and, would start involving other stuff. And I won't say that I didn't believe you, but what I'll say I felt at the time was like, well, I'm not concerned like it's going to do all that. And this is moving on to become like one of the year's controversies, it feels like. Like I said, Valve responds to MasterCard blaming Steam's rules for controversial game delistings. This news story over on Hot Hardware by Alan Velasco. The gaming community has been in an uproar after storefronts such as Steam started a mass delisting of adult games following pressure by payment processors. Gamers subsequently mobilized to lead a campaign against these delistings, inundating companies such as MasterCard, Visa, and PayPal with phone calls regarding their policies. Now, MasterCard has attempted to distance itself from the situation by trying to shift the blame to Valve, and Valve has responded. I laugh because for those of us in the PC space, this is kind of the thing that normally we see between AMD or Intel and motherboard manufacturers. So what will typically happen is a new processor will come out, there'll be problems. The motherboard manufacturers will kind of tiptoe around like, well, we're dealing with this, we're investigating it, blah, blah, blah. Try, a couple other shenanigans. And then eventually, if they're pushed too far, and the same thing happens with GPUs and AIB vendors. And then eventually, typically one side or the other will throw shade at the other one. Like we're doing everything that we can. AMD is providing us support for investigating their issue, or something like that, to just suddenly indicate like it's not really our problem, it's their problem. MasterCard has released a statement seeking to clarify all the headlines, clarify in quotes, all the headlines spawned by the kerfuffle. The company says it hasn't played a role in placing restrictions on content available on gaming storefronts, adding that our payment network follows standards based on the rule of law. Put simply, we allow all lawful purchases on our network. At the same time, we require merchants to have appropriate controls to ensure MasterCard cards cannot be used for unlawful purchases, including illegal adult content. So skip a little bit ahead. So Valve then released a statement of its own to Kotaku, and basically it says that MasterCard is trying to say that it's not them, but there are several payment processing partners who indicated that the rule that it's impacting them, and it's MasterCard's rule. So it's like a contractual flow down. The rule declares that merchants can't partake in transactions that are illegal or likely more applicable to this situation, which can be damaging to the MasterCard brand. Moreover, offering products that are patently offensive and lack serious artistic value or material that the corporation deems unacceptable can result in a merchant being cut off from payment processors. So this gets into a little bit, comments from Nate. MasterCard also denied that it was them saying it was Visa. And then Nate mentions that, so MasterCard just out here lying. So, tail of the tape that's oriented around why I say don't, like, there are problems with Bitcoins and by way of transfer NFTs, but there's a fundamental concept and principle at the basis of that organization, even though you may not like the implementation. So before you just turn away from the channel, you heard me say NFTs, just hear me out. So at the basis of this notion of digital currencies is this foundational principle that for most of the civilized world, right, currencies are, monies are based on a thing that we call fiat currencies. So when you go way back in time to the history, I by the way, am not like an academic expert on this. This is just my understanding from what I've read and studied and all the years I've been listening to, this stuff. So when you go way back in history to the history of the United States, obviously we had this thing called Fort Knox, right? And we had tons of gold bricks, and theoretically those gold bricks backed the US dollar, right, in the currency. Things were tightly coupled. And then as you proceed down the line, we get to a point where we're in a world where we exist today, where the value of the US dollar is kind of just what it is, right? It's not backed by like how much gold we have or how much silver is stuffed away. It's just based on, I think it's principally based on like the international credit rating, right, that nations receive. But basically, there's an institution that determines what the rate of currencies are and the rate at which currencies trade. The problem with that are there's things like the US can just print money like into infinity. Like, it doesn't matter. There's no control about it. But the biggest thing that impacts us directly as customers, it impacts us directly as citizens, is as part of that machinery, right, over the decades, what it has given rise to is what I call is all these middlemen whose palms need to be greased in order for payments to go through. And so where I talk about where this thing can be a point of aggravation or irritation, so for lack of a better term, I'm a content creator, right? Anybody who has a YouTube channel, does whatever, let's just call them a content creator for now. So I'm a content creator. I want to pay, so a good example is a Dark Knight, right? Stone, who I think lots of people in the community kind of know or are familiar with or heard of. She's trying to like start her art business, right? I want to pay Stone to make a profile for me and some banner art and some other stuff, right? I would like to just give Stone, and I'm just hand waving it, just calling it round numbers. I would like to give Stone $50, right? To pay her for the artwork. But in order for me to do that, for instance, I have to get her account and go through PayPal, which means in order for that money to move as a bit across the electronic systems from my bank, where already we have a problem because my currency at my bank exists as a digital bit, right, and not as real money that the bank is actually physically holding, right? In order to get that thing to move, it has to go from my bank to a thing called an ACH or an automatic clearinghouse, and I believe it hits ACHs on either side of the transaction. So it has to do the bank has to do a handshake with the ACH. The ACH has to hand off to PayPal. PayPal has to hand off to another ACH, and then that ACH has to hand off to that person's bank, right? So all along, this is, by the way, right, you have this outrage when you go to the ATM and you want to withdraw what you think is your money, and the ATM tells you have to pay a $3.50 fee, right, to withdraw your own money, right? Because there are these financial entities, these digital entities in between you and conducting that transaction who have to be paid. This is why you go to some merchants, obviously less and less today, but typically all merchants will complain about, when you want to use a credit card and don't pay cash, right, there's other fees that are associated with that sometimes hit them and their margin. So what the digital currencies seek to do is they seek to get rid of all that, right, and enable you to do a more direct transaction with the other person. That's neither here nor there, right? My point is that, as we see in this instance, those middlemen are the initial point of the waterfall and the cascade of this thing, right? Because the ACH or some other digital entity, financial institution that is not the bank, not MasterCard, right, says, look, in order for us to conduct payment transactions, we have to abide by MasterCard's rules, and MasterCard has this rule that says we're not supposed to be doing this, and we don't want to be liable, right? We don't want that to be on us, Steam, right? Valve, like that needs to be on you, right? You need to do something about that. And of course, then we have this other part of the mix where, theoretically some religious organization or something reached out because they were bent out of shape and kicked this whole thing off. The point is that the point, if you think about things kind of like we deal with, cybersecurity, and you talk about attack surfaces and points of vulnerability, the problem is that as a financial institution around the world, our attack surface is incredibly huge because there's all these points of attack where somebody can push, right, and inflect a point of momentum that ripples throughout the whole structure. So that's why some of these things are bad. It's one thing, but that's also kind of an explanation about like how this is all coming about and how it's happening. So I think that's all I kind of want to mention on that. I think the other thing that's obviously going on is this is happening on Steam. It's happening with itch.io. I think it's also happening with Epic. I think the one person who is the one company who seems to be bucking the trend or has some means of skirting around this is Good Old Games, or GOG, which uses the GOG Galaxy launcher on your PC for those who are on PC. And so I forget what it is. I can't remember whether it's something they started or some organization called like Freedom of Games or something like that. But obviously GOG has had this long-standing thing that there's no DRM in their games and yada yada yada. And so what that sometimes means for GOG is they don't have like the newest games because most publishers want to put some type of DRM in their game titles. Sometimes those things eventually wind up on GOG, particularly when you look at something like Denuvo, which for whatever reason publishers still use, but typically the way they go about it is they put it in the game and then they eventually strip it out after they feel like it served its purpose. So I guess if you want to skirt those things, you can go to GOG. But I also think, from what I've seen, Valve, Steam, and I think itch.io maybe, or at least Steam is also now back in the process of relisting those things. So first of all, they didn't take them off the store. They delisted or de-indexed them. So they are still there. You will still find them if you conduct a search, but you will not see them like aggregated and presented in any type of database view. And so, long way to go around it, but databases have a data structure, and then those structures can be presented in different views for the purposes of different users, right? And so, for instance, a view that you may want to see in Steam is a view of, I don't know, I'll call it all hentai games, right? And that view gets constructed when you go into the search box and hit hentai, and then like all the games come up that have that tag right as a piece of metadata associated with them. So that is a view. So you can still get to those things that way, as far as I understand. If you go and search for a specific title, I believe you can still find it. So I think the other news nit that I saw with this is that they first delisted the games, then itch.io said it was conducting an audit of the content that was there to determine what could then be re-indexed and presented in more native materialized views for you to just hit a link and see without having to go through all the shenanigans. But I believe, and then eventually they will re-index and make them discoverable and presentable right from the UI of whatever storefront is applicable. So I think Steam is on the other side of that and is starting to re-index things. Some of the things might be coming back. I'm not exactly sure. But if you need that type of content, I think there's a solution being worked. And in the meantime, tons of corporate shade will continue to be thrown between these organizations. So Nerds, thanks so much for coming through. I appreciate you. So it mentions in GOG we trust. Yeah, there are some people who are huge proponents of GOG. I have a GOG account. I have some games to them. I typically find that it's where I go for games, or sometimes. And this is another thing, like not everybody understands that GOG is owned by CD Projekt Red. And so, as far as newer games, you will always find the CD Projekt Red games there. So my copy of Cyberpunk 2077 and Phantom Liberty is through GOG. But yeah, for people who are extreme freedom fighters and really get wrapped around the axle about digital freedom, that is the place for you to go. All right, let's go on to the next news story. Okay, Kingmakers, the medieval combat sim with tanks and M16s, warns that guns don't always win knife fights. Not all of your bullets will have an easy time taking down an enemy type. So I wanted to intermix this story in amongst all the business and technology stuff that we talked, just to kind of bring things up. Just one go back, nerds. Yeah, I got GOG because of Cyberpunk. Very good. So this is one of the games that caught my eye in the Future Game Show from the week of Summer Game Fest. Again, just to stomp my feet and throw some slander and shaming on gamers in the gaming community. We should pay attention, right, to more games than just more shows than just like the Keighley show, or more games than just out of the PlayStation and Xbox show and Nintendo showcases. This past summer, and we really have done it for years on E2KG, we watch as many shows as we possibly can. So we typically watch anywhere from 8 to 12 shows. I kind of failed out of the loop with some of the ones kind of on the periphery this year, but I did watch the Future Game Show. It was actually the best show I felt of all the shows presented during Summer Game Fest week. But this is one of the games that caught my eye. I don't know if everybody has seen this trailer. I don't know how well it's going to blow up on the screen. Try and play it back at 1440p and roll it back to the beginning. But yeah, I thought this one was pretty interesting. So, pretty sure. I think it's like an RTS plus third-person action adventure game. So I believe this is like an RTS where you can so you can see them zooming out now, where you can zoom in and take control of some of the people. It's kind of I don't know what to call it. It's well, first of all, it's full of kind of British humor, kind of like along the lines of kind of like what Fable is shooting for. But the premise is that these guys are like a bunch of time travelers from the modern age who can go back into ancient times, and when they do, they go back and they take modern weaponry with them. So you can see the guy here like with an M16 taking on some of the medieval troops. Kingmakers, the game that asks what if you brought an M1 Abrams main battle tank to a knife fight, is set to enter early access on October 8th. And with that date slowly grinding nearer, developer Redemption Road has released its debut dev blog, which I'm sorry to say is not about M1 Abrams battle tanks, but rather the game's medieval units and machinery and how you'll handle them on the battlefield. Kingmakers will launch into early access with 6 unit types, each with distinct strengths and weaknesses: swordsmen, spearmen, cavalry, archers, berserkers, and men-at-arms. Most of those units will also be upgradable through 2 or 3 tiers and can be further enhanced by a full skill tree powered by collectible holy relics. Medieval machinery, including trebuchets, ballistae, and archer towers will also be on tap. Devs mentioned that the Total War series is a big inspiration, and you can kind of see some of that spiritual sense kind of in the game. It's set in the 16th century, also heavily influenced by Mount and Blade. So I think this will be an interesting game to go into our early access. I haven't tracked how much of this game is oriented around PvE or PvP. I know the tendency around early access games is that a lot of them are PvP games. I believe this is a single-player game, though. At its core, may have multiple modes. As someone who hasn't been paying especially close attention to Kingmaker's development, the focus on strategy in the first ever devlog is a little unexpected. We've known from the start the Kingmakers will feature strategy elements, but it's previously presented itself more as more of a slapstick action-focused game. And yeah, I want to say when I look at like some of the kind of ragdoll physics in it, the game reminds me of like Human Fall Flat. I think is the game that has been kind of crawling around in the back of my mind that I couldn't land on. But it should be interesting. Kind of quirky, like I said, from its sense of humor, but the physics and the RTS of it is one of the things I'm certainly looking forward to. Nerds and Other Legends, to be honest, I don't watch all the shows at all. I'll watch the Xbox and Nintendo showcase, but that's about it. Anything else, I just rely on secondhand highlights, and that's perfectly acceptable. Like, it's not a when I say I don't necessarily mean watch in terms of like sit and watch it from beginning to end. I just mean more of like pay attention to the games that are coming out of it, right? So that you kind of don't fall in the hole of like only tracking the things that are, on Metacritic, or only the things that major news outlets are raising up, because then there's a lot of stuff that it's like, quite frankly, lots of people missed Expedition 33, even though it was at a big showcase, but as an indie title, it wasn't one that a lot of the major news outlets really hyper-focused on and carried a lot of news about. I read most of what I read about Expedition 33 on Sandfall's website, because after I saw like all this stuff, I went and bookmarked the website, just kept going back and periodically checking. So, often there will be gems and things that are particularly interesting and outside the mainstream that I think it's worthwhile for gamers to take a look at and discover on their own. Discoverability is becoming more and more and more of a problem with storefronts and just the way the news tracks things. So just a suggestion for gamers as participation in your hobby. Let's go on to the next news story. Okay, this news story over on WCCF Tech by Ramesh Zafar. AMD gutted by China GPU ban post Q2 operating loss. AMD reported mixed Q2 2025 earnings with revenue of $7.6 billion, beating analyst expectations, but EPS falling short at 48 cents versus the 49 cents expected. And yes, Wall Street is that harsh. You miss by a penny, you get punished. Despite projecting strong Q3 guidance of $8.7 billion in revenue and 50% gross margin, shares fell 4.2% in after-hours trading. The company posted a GAAP operating loss of $134 million due to a 59% year-over-year surge in cost of goods sold, largely tied to $800 million in inventory charges linked to U.S. export restrictions on its Instinct MI308 AI chips. On a non-GAAP basis, AMD reported an operating profit of $897 million, down 29% year over year and 50% from the previous quarter. While AMD highlighted that these adjusted figures provide a clearer view of core performance and emphasized they should not replace GAAP results. So let's dig into that a little bit deeper. AMD reported a non-GAAP operating profit of $897 million in Q2 2025, but this marked, as I said, a 29% year-over-year decline and a steep 50% drop from the previous quarter. Operating profit, which reflects earnings from core business activities, was positive only after excluding certain one-time charges, notably an $800 million inventory write-down tied to U.S. export restrictions on its Instinct MI308 AI chips. While non-GAAP adjustments suggest AMD's core operations remain profitable, the sharp sequential and annual declines highlight significant pressures on margins. The company's cost of goods sold rose 59% year over year, far outpacing its 32% revenue growth, leading to the GAAP operating loss. These challenges indicate that rising costs and geopolitical risks are undermining AMD's short-term financial health. Despite strong revenue guidance for the next quarter, the earnings trend that likely contributed to the post-report stock drop, as investors reacted more to the downward trajectory in profitability than the EPS miss itself. So the difference in let's go back and look at the terms. The difference in operating profit and the GAAP, non-GAAP reports, right? Or this kind of gets into the air, and I won't go into it in a ton of detail because honestly, these are the level of details that I don't have memorized, and I often have to be looking at a book to remind myself of. But essentially, what the tail of the tape of a lot of this is that before you hit what generally we call EBIT or EBITDA, and you take into account all of taxes and other fees and this write down, basically what they're trying to say is, hey, minus all that, our business is profitable, right? We're doing good work, we're providing good products, but we're being hit upside the head with these adversities that there were no way for us to anticipate. What drove the inventory write-down? I think the inventory write-down was done because I believe a government restriction went in place that didn't enable them to sell those chips, I think, into China. I'll double check that as we're going on through this. And so these guys had inventory standing around that they were planning to have sold, but they weren't able to. And so that caused the hit. So after you take all those things into account, they actually suffered a loss. AMD's core business remains operationally profitable, but it's navigating a costly and disruptive environment, particularly tied to export controls and supply chain overhang. While non-GAAP figures offer a more optimistic view, the steep sequential and annual declines in operating income indicate deteriorated short-term financial health and challenges in managing costs amid geopolitical and regulatory volatility. Despite strong revenue growth, AMD's financial health appears weakened in the short term due to those headwinds. The company's cost structure was severely impacted by forced inventory devaluation tied to export controls, highlighting how vulnerable AMD is to regulatory shifts, especially with AI products. Non-GAAP gross margin offers reassurance that the core business remains efficient and profitable under normal conditions, but the GAAP operating loss reminds investors that external risk can quickly erode profitability, regardless of revenue performance. Moving forward, managing that risk exposure will be key to stabilizing margins and restoring investor confidence. So, not a ton of insights here. I was hoping to see kind of some more insights into kind of what was going on behind the curtains with them and Microsoft. But I wasn't really able to glean that out of the information provided. I think this is a larger story about how we might expect lots of tech companies, including those that are providing gaming products, to be affected by not just tariffs. I think there's a lot of hyper focus on tariffs, and this kind of brings out the fact that tariffs aren't the only threat right in the wind from policy. These things where export controls are getting locked down obviously are affecting AMD and have been affecting NVIDIA as well, although I think I saw a story that said NVIDIA had gotten some relief over a specific type of chip that it was able to sell into China. So I think the big thing, is obviously that we want here, there's a lot riding on Gen 10 and AMD providing those chips. There's a lot riding on the viability of the handheld market, and AMD bringing those chips. I mean, the good news story in this is that I didn't see anything in this that tells me that there's a manufacturing problem or a yield problem or a product evolution problem. Like you're seeing that about Intel. One of the news stories that I posted today was that Intel is being severely challenged by getting its 18A fabrication process nailed down. Yields are extremely bad. I think I saw they're only getting yields of something like 25% right now. Customers are unhappy. Chips are coming out that aren't meeting the spec and performance requirements. Now, as far as I know, I think what I saw was that the 18A chip is really just an internal chip. So it's really just like being used internally at Intel and circulated to customers. It's kind of early release, early look stuff. And I don't believe it's actual retail product that's coming out on the roadmap, I think. And so there might be time to recover, you would hope. But they are having problems. So in the meantime, it looks like AMD is going to be the only game in town, not just for ramping up on consoles, which kind of would have already been the case anyway, but also for chips coming to handheld. Until we see what I hope is NVIDIA NVIDIA collaborations with MediaTek and Qualcomm getting us chips to run Windows on ARM, and those make their way to handhelds. But I think I heard something today that indicated that the NVIDIA MediaTek CPU SoC that is going to be used for Windows on ARM has also been delayed. So that again might yield AMD being the only game in town. And as we talked about last week, right, I start to get more and more concerned in the gaming space about single vendors, right, being the only solution to certain components, to certain blocks in a system of systems makeup. I don't think that's good for us as gamers, and hopefully, things like that will improve. I want to go back from Nate. Agree, discoverability is becoming more and more of a problem, despite us having the information more readily than ever before. Yeah, it's really because we're being overloaded, right? And to go back and say that my statement wasn't trying to put that all on gamers' shoulder, right? It's hugely challenging. There's 700 games a year, plus games a year, coming out for each console-ish. There's 19,000 games a year coming out on Steam. Quite honestly, tongue-in-cheek, this notion of bad games being delisted on Steam, probably not necessarily a huge bad thing for gamers, because now there should be about several thousand games that are delisted that won't be in your windshield and will help you discover games on Steam, because there's a ton of hentai games on Steam, which is why I always clap back at the anti-DEI folks who are gaming's woke and we don't have the content we want. I'm like, dude, you guys have all the content you want. Just go to PC, and you don't need a super powerful PC to play those hentai games anyway, because they're all baby gap graphics. So I think you guys will be fine. Okay, let's go. Let's try and go to the next topic that I want to get into. Maybe a little meandering. This is one of our topics in social media for tonight. Okay. Funny story from Nate. Funny story about hentai games. There was one that had a really interesting turn-based combat system. I never bought it, but I keep considering it. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't know how your relationship in your household goes, but I might want to get a green light on that. Just so. Nobody walks in the room surprised at what's up on your screen. They want to put a early disclaimer out on that one. This topic is going to get a little complicated. So the banner that I have going across is, as gamers we lean too much on inferences and disregard scale. This applies to acquisitions and porting strategies, amongst other things. So we'll start with just kind of some hand-wringing that I was going through. I think this was Saturday. So I think this was after the show Saturday. And I was heading for bed in the early hours of the morning, and I put this post up that I'm already thinking about. Gives new meaning to the word handheld. This is a family-friendly show, so I'll tag. So I put this, posted this thing about I'm already thinking about a pivot. In several conversations last week, I'll say kind of weighed heavily on me, right, in terms of just the interfacing with the gaming community, and some of the messaging. One of the things, and one of the reasons why I'm here tonight doing episode 4 is a lot of this comes from you guys who are in the chat. Um, one of the reasons, despite the 24 times, right, over the last 3 years and the multiple Twitter accounts that I've closed and then come back, that I've always struggled with, and that you guys have said is, you have encouraged me to do this because you feel like there's a perspective that I provide that is helpful and maybe differentiated from a lot of the other stuff that you hear in the gaming discussion. Conversely, what I have also gotten back from a lot of people is that it's difficult. They're trying to learn about the industry. They're trying to understand how the sausage is made, and they're trying to understand why things might be happening in the industry or how they might be happening in the industry. And they've said to me it's difficult to get to that when there's such a high signal to noise ratio, right, in the gaming discussion. There's so much, console warring and tribalism that, if I'm trying to read one thing and understand it and I have some questions to ask, it's hard to do that when, in a thread, you have a half dozen people coming in there yelling and screaming and shouting because, their feelings are hurt because you're talking negatively about, their preferred platform. So that's kind of where this started. And then kind of as I went through some other conversations, I kind of hit on this other thing that I started thinking about, which is that, we do a lot. And when I say we, I include myself in that group, right? We do a lot of, A plus B is greater than C plus D, therefore Y must be true, right? And so I wrote this thing. I said, if the only counter to an inferred causality is another inference, then it is likely that across the spectrum of variables, it is possible for both cases to be true at different instances across a range of different scenarios. Critical fault 1 in most gaming conversations is that we talk in absolutes. Critical fault 2 is that we mix up causality with covariance. This is, again, something that I have been guilty of, not in the gaming conversation. It's something that I have actually been guilty of at work as I have gotten more and more involved in data engineering and data science and rendering AI ML solutions. And it has been a very complicated technical discussion that I've had with my own folks. And while some titles for some, let me go back to that. I realized I mentioned that and just kind of skipped over it. So mixing up causality with covariance. What we often say and leap to, and again, not just in the gaming discussion, is that because every time I get bitten, there's a dog in the room, therefore the dog must be the thing biting me, right? And sometimes that will be true, but sometimes it won't be true. Sometimes it just happens that there happens to be a dog in the room, but you're getting bitten by something else, right? And so more data has to be compiled and analyzed in order to wind up on a final actual conclusion that it's the dog that's biting you. It just might happen to be that like I said, that the dog is just an occurrence, and it might be associated with a different symptom. We talk about this a lot in medicine, right? That a patient will have symptoms that are associated with a particular disease, but it's not actually but those two things aren't necessarily related. It's that the disease causes a thing, and the way in which your body reacts to it, right, is by trying to expunge the disease or whatever. Maybe that's not a great example, but my point is that I think a better way to back into that is the discussion of, when doctors talk about treating symptoms versus treating the disease, right? The symptom isn't the thing that's making you sick. It's the actual disease. And treating the symptom will keep it under control, but it won't actually eliminate the causality, right? So the symptom is something that comes about because you have the disease. It's not the thing that's actually making you sick. And so we do a lot of this kind of inference and cross-inference and counter-inference, right, to get to things that we believe are true in the gaming conversation. And so what it goes on here to say is I say, well, for some titles from some publishers, and so what this is about the conversation about, does Game Pass condition Xbox gamers to not buy games, or do Xbox gamers actually buy games because Xbox makes X amount of revenue, right? And so what I said is, well, for some titles from some publishers on Xbox, they will see it as true that Xbox gamers buy games. For some other titles from other publishers, they will see it as true that Game Pass has conditioned people to not buy games. Regardless of either of those possibilities, it is a quantifiable fact that the total addressable market of the Xbox install base is less than the other platforms, resulting in a sensible lower estimate of the total units you're likely to sell through on the platform. So my point of this is that when you're running ROI, right, and you're making the go, no-go decision about, am I publishing my game to Xbox? The simple fact of the matter is that there's, 30 to 40 million people on Xbox. There's, 124 million monthly active users over on PlayStation, and there's 150 million on Switch, and there's 132 million right on Steam. And so as you're juggling the calculus of what resources you have and how much time it's going to take and how much investment it's going to take, the math of like how many units am I likely to sell on Xbox is most likely going to come out lower, because you're going to base that on the entry criteria of, well, how many people have the thing in the first place. So again, this is the type of thing that to me is just mathematically factual, and people shouldn't get offended by somebody saying that, right? It's just a fact. As I keep telling people, making the go, no-go call to a platform is a matter of competitive risk assessment, projected sales, and a figure that I combine here called investment and time. And that is going to be determined by your team, talent, tools, and anticipated impediments and opportunities. We do a lot of this thing of like, it's not hard to port games, right? I'm like, hold on a second, time out. Like, every team across the entire industry is not of the same talent, right? And so for some teams, yes, porting a game somewhere is going to be more difficult for them than somebody else. If you have a ton of stuff going through your production pipeline, and the team who has your port sharpshooters and your most talented people is not available, your A team, right? It's going to be more difficult than it might otherwise be. Throughout my career, a big thing I've had a pushback on is when we go to price doing a job, and that job is priced on, number one, happy path, which is just a fight that I always have with the marketing guys, right? Let's just assume that everything's going to go fine. No, we're not going to do that, because everything's not going to go fine. But more importantly, right, is also this notion that, I come back and I say, hey, this job is going to be really tough, right, given like the technical variables involved. And what I get back is, well, I'm going to give you an A team. I'm like, well, first of all, in my career, I don't know that I've ever been given the A team. I think I was given the A team like once, and that was after my project like got like in serious duress, and people were yelling and fighting, and there were weekly meetings with VPs, right, because people were pissed off. But in general, like, what I am insistent upon when I estimate a job and scope a job is that I don't base it on the assumption that I'm going to have the A team, right? Because you're unlikely to control that in the entirety of a business dynamic of a project that goes across multiple years. Enix mentions facts, no development team or game is exactly like another, right? And this goes to kind of another, study and assessment that's being made out in sociology. And, I've mentioned this to Brap before. A lot of the more recent like academic work about successful teams has shown that, and again, stepping out of the gaming conversation, talking about kind of professional life, particularly in the tech industry and like in a lot of these industries with type A personalities, we hugely do this thing where, again, type A personalities and the type of swagger that people come into a conference room with, where, people assert, well, I did these 5 things on this project, and so therefore, if you do those 5 things, your project will be successful. No, right? The things that you did worked because at that moment in time, right, the highly chaotic, highly entropic mixture of variables involved in the equation, like, mixed in a perfect storm that led to success. And so the moods people were in, like, how many people on your project team were pregnant or, having children, right, plays into it. How many people, were in schools, like their mental health, like their dynamic state, what stage of their career was in, what your age spread demographic was across your team. What different evolutions are happening in technology, what tools did you get, like these things develop in this mix. And so they are not simply, they're not simply because of the people on the team, right? If it's almost guaranteed. Like if you take even the 5 like team members, right, from the same team and put them on a project, things will fall apart. This is why you see people who are, veterans at a studio doing AAA games, right, go off and create their own studio, and then that studio not be successful, right? Because the conditions are different, because the dynamic changes. Just because they have the skill and the talent and all the experience of the last thing they did doesn't, beget that they're naturally going to be successful next time around. So again, whether or not it's hard for you getting a game onto another platform is going to be driven by the team that you have, the talent and the tools that they have. Anticipated impediments and opportunities, right? So it matters, like, whether or not they're part of a larger corporation, whether or not that larger corporation's priorities change, whether you're part of EA and EA comes along and says, hey, you now have to use Frostbite, right? I don't care that you're not experienced using it. Like, we invested the money, so now everybody's got to use this engine. Those things have impact. So I'll go on. So some publishers will have a bigger risk appetite sometimes. Some will project good sales, maybe based on genre or franchise IP. Again, we're talking about putting a game on Xbox. And some will decide they have the pockets for the investment and any extension and schedule, and will assess porting a game isn't a big deal. Some will be bullish, but then some won't. IT as a business, as I often mention with respect to giving consumers reasons to buy your console, you'd like to make that publishing choice for a publisher or a developer a slam dunk. And even if you do, they will still be challenged by discoverability, right? So my point here is that, it's kind of you would think it would kind of be like a default, right, or a slam dunk again. That, hey, in a green light meeting, what platforms are we going to? If you're a third party publisher, we'll probably go into PlayStation, right? They have the largest install base of the high end, high spending customer market. But even then, when you make that decision, right, your problem's going to be, okay, yeah, we're going to go to that market, but understand we're going to be up against like a hell of a very strong competition. Same thing in the PC space. I think maybe it was in the Matt Piscatella, Christopher Dring interview on the Game Business Show. I think it was mentioned there that that developers prioritize PC, or they don't care as much about consoles. I can't remember where exactly I heard that from. But my point is, yeah, there's a lot of them that publish the PC, and there's a lot of them that are one of the 19,000 games that get published. Of the games that were only like the top 100 clear $100,000. So you've got 18,900 games a year that get published that don't even make enough money to pay one developer's salary. So yeah, they may decide to publish to PC because maybe it's easier and there's smaller hoops and hurdles to jump through and there's easier access to tools, right? But their risk exposure is huge. It's significantly larger, right, in making their that thing that I talked about earlier, the competitive risk assessment is also a mountain for them to surmount. So on this topic, I don't come down on there being one truth and one falsehood. I come down on it's an unquestionable dynamic on the suppliers that some are running that calculus to publish to Xbox and coming down on the side of no-go. And I think that has had or maybe can eventually have an impact on consumers choosing to buy the console and or ensuing pubs and devs making that call. It's a working theory anyway. So my point is that is very often in this discussion, it's just one of them. The two sides fight, and very vigorously it's Xbox gamers don't buy games, right? And I get it. I understand how that can be bothersome. I also constantly come back to the diehards on social media are not the market, right? And so, diehards on social media may say, well, I buy games. Okay, well, that doesn't mean that your entire user install base buys games. And then some others will come back and say, no, we absolutely do. Like, here's the proof, and the proof is based on like a mixture of anecdotes. So this to me falls in the same bucket as, is Game Pass profitable? And I said, a few weeks ago, I'm like, I don't really know why you guys bother having that conversation, because you're never going to arrive at anything conclusive. Like, until Xbox makes an SEC filing that says on a piece of paper that that Game Pass is profitable, or Game Pass is not profitable, like you don't know. So the best thing you can do is just believe them. And then I'll hold back the caveat that says, profitability on a GAAP balance sheet is one thing. That's how we file the numbers. Total cost analysis of what's actually going on and driving or dragging the business is a different thing, and that may present like a different view or perspective. on that particular go-to-market activity. But again, that's a reason that I can be skeptical, but it wouldn't give me enough ammunition to say Game Pass is not profitable. So maybe we stop talking in absolutes, right, and just have a conversation about, what the over-under is on things that could be, where that could be, natively true, or whether or not the view that we're presenting, it's being presented in the GAAP SEC filings is the thing that that is true or not true. I don't know. So yeah, let's go on to the next topic and then maybe come back to. Oh no, I may be wrong in the agenda. I am actually. So let's stick with topics in social media for 100, Bob. Get a little discombobulated and lost in translation here, I think. Okay, let's go ahead and read through this post and do the breakdown and analysis as we go. As far as I can tell, the Senior Director Multi-Platform Account Management rec at SIE has been taken down as of yesterday. As a hiring manager in the tech space for 20 plus years, I do not tell recruiting to take the rec down until I have made an offer and the offer has been accepted. In some cases, the recs will even stay up until the person is onboarded, because so many late gen millennials and Gen Z will just not bother reporting or will take another job offer even after they've already committed. So what's the over under on the cause of the takedown? SIE sourced resumes, ID'd an interview slate, scheduled and completed all interviews, probably an interview pipeline with multiple interviews, collected interview evals and hire down select inputs, extended an offer, and it was accepted all within 5 working days. Another option would be the rec was a rubber duck, meaning the candidate was already a pre-selected internal hire and the external rec was just to rubber stamp the legal HR requirement that some management positions posted for competition. And option 3, HR got spooked when IT told them that the rec had 3 billion hits from gamers on Twitter, and that they were going to give them a bigger allocation of cloud spend for this quarter, and higher up management felt the rec was giving away too much info on their strategy. So, one of my points of this is a lot of the controversy that I saw, and I want to tiptoe through this very carefully, was because Detective Seeds had put out that a bunch of additional information that he had gotten a hold of, attesting that this was a position that already existed, that the person was leaving, that therefore the rec went out to be backfilled. And that's why this rec was even posted. This is a function that already existed within the SIE organization, and that it wasn't like this embarking on a new strategy that some have asserted that it is. I've done a couple things where I've just wanted to post context because I'm not necessarily coming down. I'm not coming down on the side of Detective Seeds is right. Or like other parties are correct. I'm just providing background context that I have from having been a hiring manager and having been through a lot of these same situations before. And so actually, just as I was talking through this, I actually realized a couple things that I didn't put in here. So I have been involved in, if that is the scenario, I have been involved in that exact scenario before, where I think it might have been my first time in management or my second time. The section manager, so a section manager had been promoted to a department head. The section manager job was open. I had applied to it, and that rec had gone out to be visible to internal people only. I had applied for it. I had interviewed for it. The person who was going to become my new boss had told me that, basically like I was his first pick. But what HR said is that and this is absolutely true in HR. Like, they have to have enough data to assert that they are being fair and allowing jobs to be competed for, and that people are not just being handpicked for those, because then you get into, well, you picked this person, why didn't you pick that person? There's a lot of defense that has to go along with that. Hey, Galatian, thanks so much for stopping through. And so basically what I was told was, you have the job, but HR is telling us we have to open the job for like 5 days, and if nobody else applies, or I don't see any recs where there's a serious question as to whether or not you're more qualified or they are, then I'll make you the job offer. So these things do happen, and they go on all the time. Whether or not that corroborates whether or not this was a pre-existing position or just needed to be a backfill. The only other thing that I will say that does ring true for me is there was a lot of belief that the other job positions that were talked about in here were new recs. But look, I write recs all the time. I've applied for several jobs and worked at multiple companies. I won't say that I'm an expert in reading recs, but I would say that I'm pretty good, that I'm above the layman's level of kind of reading the tea leaves on this thing. And what I read in the rec was that those were not new positions, that those were already existing positions of people who were going to report to this person. So whether or not, how you extrapolate whether or not you want to believe that like first party single player games are coming to Xbox and when, that's up to you. I don't really care. But I'm just trying to provide some context based on actual experience in this area, and not solely based on like which platform I want to win. So I think I've got one more social media thing that I want to hit before we get out of here tonight, but I'm going to move on to actually, I may do this now. Let me just check. Yeah, I do have one more social media topic I want to hit before we get back to the news. So I posted this because I feel like, and this is a piggyback off the job rec, right? I feel like there is this, and I may be overstating what some people feel, and maybe commingling a lot of the things that I've heard, but I feel like there's this effort to purport that gamers care less and less about hardware. Phil Spencer has made the statement that I want people to buy our hardware on the merits of the hardware, which is a very kind of PC centric thing to say, right? Like I don't buy an NVIDIA GPU because there's a specific title, right, that I can play. Like there's nothing exclusive to NVIDIA GPUs. There are weirdisms that we've seen over like the history of the gaming industry where like a feature is in a game, and that feature only gets presented right on a particular piece of silicon, right? We have things like PhysX, right? Originally was a thing that had been started by a startup in Silicon Valley. It eventually came to market on I think they were called PhysX Aegea cards. And then that technology was bought by NVIDIA and then rolled into the GeForce drivers, and then enabled as an API, right, for developers, and it was proprietary to NVIDIA. I think eventually PhysX got also rolled into DirectX. I think it's there. There's always been like this crossover and cross-pollination of different technologies and methodologies in graphics acceleration. So, but at any rate, but then there were only certain games that took advantage of PhysX, right? So you would only get that on an NVIDIA card. So we have some things that will happen like that. We have you'll still sometimes see them if you play older games, but the Sound Blaster API, or EAX, right, was a specific audio codec that was obviously only available exclusively on Creative Labs cards. And so you would see that as a selectable item in a drop-down menu, and you could only select it if you had that hardware. So generally PC, a little more. I don't necessarily want to call it open yet, because we still have this thing where most things that are like DLSS, that is an NVIDIA thing. RTX, which most PC gamers refer to as ray tracing, is actually not ray tracing. It's the NVIDIA proprietary specific implementation of ray tracing, right? And it's actually not available to every card. FSR as a I forget what you call it. It's not a frame generation technology. I forget what the overall label is that we put on FSR and DLSS right at the moment, but FSR is an open source version of that, so that is available, and that's why your NVIDIA card can actually run FSR and DLSS. But I feel like this movement, this motion that's out there of a voice track of, exclusives are no longer important. The next generation only cares about gaming on handhelds and phones. The only thing that they put a priority on is ease of access and convenience. Kind of intermingles with what I feel like I'm hearing kind of behind that people don't care about hardware. And so what I wrote here is that I don't think the 124 million MAU on PlayStation, or the 150 million on Switch 2, or the 132 million MAU on Steam don't care about hardware. And those first 174 million probably aren't interested in building their own Xbox, which is a statement that I guess Paris mentioned today. I've heard it, in other places. I think Paris feels that when people bring that up, they're weaponizing it. I'm not weaponizing it. I'm just saying, this seems to be a sentiment that's out there, that people are interested in building their own Xbox, which is a neat kind of hobbyist thing. Like I used to build, Raspberry Pis, right, in little mini boxes to use for kind of IoT stuff. So I get it. But or paying for an Xbox PC hybrid that is in the thin price slice above console but below performant PC. So this goes back to this notion that the next Xbox is a hybrid Xbox PC, and I have said that is like this market subsector that we used to have above consoles but below full-blown desktop PCs, where you would have things like the Atari Amiga, Coleco Atom, TI-99, Commodore 64, and VIC-20. So I apologize. I realized I probably rattled off that list last time on the last episode too for another topic where it was pertinent. But that, that's, if the Xbox PC hybrid comes out, it probably goes into that type of category. It's probably a little more expensive, but it offers a little more capability. Maybe some percentage of the Steam users will be interested, but they'll also be interested in building their own Steam box. And the more naggy Windows becomes and the shadowtisements to paid users increases, the more they'll be interested in rolling a Steam box. And so if you are a Windows user, right, this is my complaint, that I paid for a license for Windows, and yet every 3 or 4 times that I get a Windows update, I get asked these same 3 questions, as if Satya is Rick Grimes, vetting me to join the survivors in The Walking Dead. Right? It's, do you want to enable backups? Do you want to accept these recommended settings for Microsoft Edge, which I don't even use? And then some other third question. And I'm just despite everything that I've done to strip Windows of don't offer me recommendations upon startup, don't offer me shadow dropped app icons in my startup, despite all that stuff that I've done, every 3 or 4 times I get an update, I still get these 3 questions. It seems to be no way to get rid of it in Windows 11 without hacking the registry file or some mess like that. The market dynamic that undid the PlayStation Vita, consumer lack of interest in portable gaming beyond the Nintendo 3DS demographic due to the prevalence of phones and tablets then, a market that was on the rise, which has since settled into maturity, is not what we are seeing now. Consumers still care about hardware, differentiated experiences, non-commodity platforms. They're not looking for pork bellies to play their games on. As Microsoft follows Valve behind the bow wave that it has created and realizes it needs to get serious about replicating Steam as Xbox Big Picture mode, it'll be nice to see the same business models offered to gamers that we have in the PC space. We'll have walled gardens, like we do on PC with Apple, a licensed but proprietary model in a Windows PC that is labeled as an Xbox, and one that is open source, which will be Steam. It'll be a grand utopia where consumers have the choice over which model better suits their needs. As long as the multi-trillion-dollar companies are kept in check and are not allowed to use their vast financial resources to crowbar the market into what best benefits them, and drive their own hegemony via enshittification and choke point capitalism. And that is a long-running commentary that I have had, where I've been a long believer in the hypothesis of Cory Doctorow, that large corporations participate in choke point capitalism and drive this methodology towards enshittification, which is basically squeegeeing and draining all of the value out of products and services, and then making the suppliers the bad guy in an effort to make them keep their prices down, offer consumers a low entry price at the start of a service offering, and then gradually raise that, right? So they raise the prices to consumers over time while they hold the prices from the supplier steady. And then who is getting that extra money as it comes in from consumers? That's going to the middleman, right? The company, and that's why we call it enshittification, right? So, whether you like it or not, right? Examples of enshittification are, Amazon Prime now telling you get advertisements right at Amazon Prime unless you want to pay an additional fee. I think there's something else that you pay an additional fee for on Amazon Prime now, something like Dolby Atmos or something like that. I can't remember exactly. But an example of enshittification is getting people in the door on day and date, right, and then moving day and date up to the higher tier. Now again, you can determine whether or not that's a huge impact to you or a nothing burger, and that's fine, right? But it is an example of the theory of enshittification that Cory Doctorow has put out. And so, it'll be, history will kind of tell how that goes, right, over time. So Thrifty mentions Fidelity FX Super Resolution. Yeah, no, it's the term that's used for the DLSS and FSR technologies, right, for the methodology. There's like a family group name and XeSS from Intel. It's not image sharpening technologies, and it's not frame rate acceleration technologies. It's something else that, like I said, in the moment I forget, and I apologize for that. Okay, let's get back to the news. So we've got 2 more news stories in the rundown, and one we're going to dive deep on, and one we're just going to kind of crop grade. So this is the one we're going to dive a little deeper on. Ziff Davis lays off IGN staff after months-long acquisition spree. IGN has laid off 8 employees, so 12% of the IGN Creators Guild, following a cost-cutting mandate from parent company Ziff Davis, despite IGN experiencing strong revenue growth and recent event successes like Summer Game Fest and Comic-Con. Affected staff include key editors and producers, prompting concern over how remaining teams can function effectively. These layoffs are part of broader cuts at Ziff Davis, which also affected staff at CNET, Lifehacker, and other media properties. Despite ongoing acquisitions, including 5 this year, Ziff Davis has not clarified if acquisition spending will be curtailed to avoid further layoffs. The IGN union criticized the company for treating staff as expendable despite their contributions. I picked one person who was laid off just to kind of highlight and kind of go back to and provide deeper insight of kind of some of the impact of this to the IGN organization. The 4 people, at least 4 of the people, were video editor Chelsea Reed, senior features editor Matt Kim, gaming editorial events manager Rob Manuel, and entertainment reviews editor Eric Adams. Now, I am familiar by way of like reading, right, and studying with a lot of the IGN staff. None of these 4 names jump out to me. So I thought I'd pull the thread on at least one of them just to kind of bring some humanity right to the story and not just make it a strictly business conversation. Eric Adams served as the entertainment reviews editor at IGN, where he played a key role in shaping the site's coverage of television and film. Known for his thoughtful and articulate reviews, Adams brought a critical eye and deep understanding of pop culture to IGN's entertainment section. His work often highlighted both mainstream hits and niche products, helping broaden the scope of IGN's entertainment journalism. Before joining IGN, Adams was widely recognized for his work at the AV Club, where he built a reputation for in-depth analysis and a sharp editorial voice. At IGN, his contributions were integral to the success of major event coverage like Comic-Con and IGN Live, making his layoff part of a broader controversial reduction in experienced editorial talent. So this highlights that this is a big kick in the teeth, right? Because this guy just got done head honchoing the SDCC coverage for IGN. And so he comes back from this trip, and this is, what unfolds for him. I want to talk a little bit about the history of IGN, because I don't know if it's a thing that everybody is kind of aware of. Founded in 1996 as Imagine Games Network, IGN quickly grew into one of the internet's most prominent sources for video game news, reviews, and media coverage. Over the years, it expanded its focus to include entertainment, technology, and pop culture, becoming a staple in the online media landscape for gamers and general audiences alike. Acquired by News Corporation, so Rupert Murdoch's company, in 2005, and later sold to Ziff Davis in 2013, IGN has seen multiple ownership and strategic shifts as the media industry evolved. In recent years, it launched large-scale branded events like IGN Live and expanded into video, social, and international markets. However, in 2025, IGN faced internal turmoil as Ziff Davis enacted significant layoffs across its media brands, including key editorial figures at IGN, despite consecutive quarters of revenue growth and a successful year of live event coverage. So it's always kind of been interesting to me. And so, one of the things I'll say, I get and I understand that certain people are salty about IGN. Regardless of how you feel about IGN and feel about what value they provide, the fact of the matter is that IGN has been on the gaming landscape for, for now almost 30 years, right? And while we on social media may feel a certain way about IGN, IGN is like an institutionalized structure for a lot of people who don't track gaming to the depth, right? So where most of us probably have, anywhere from 12 to 34 bookmarks, right, in our browser for gaming news. There are lots of gamers who don't have anything bookmarked but IGN, right? Maybe IGN and GameSpot. IGN has been a place that a large number of the personalities that we know in gaming media, right, and YouTubers have, came through IGN. And so, while you may weigh its value differently, I do feel like it's an important thing to be aware of and know and kind of understand. And I do think also, again, regardless of kind of how you feel about the IGN staff, I will say, a good thing to listen to is some of the interviews that you will hear going on with Per Schneider on Nintendo Voice Chat, because he offers a lot of insight about his time spending covering Nintendo right for the last 30 years, and a lot of kind of the deep insight that he had, kind of having insider access and being one of the key members of the press who was able to have deep conversations with staff at Nintendo. The IGN Creators Guild, right, which is a principal part of this story, is a unionized body representing editorial staff at IGN. Formed to advocate for fair labor practices, job security, and transparency within the company, established in response to increasing industry volatility and a growing push for worker rights in digital media. The Guild has played a central role in negotiating on behalf of its members and speaking out against unjust practices. It has been particularly vocal during periods of organizational change, such as these layoffs, and we know kind of about the controversy going back and forth between them now. One of the things that the IGN union has done is they haven't been able to stop layoffs, but they have been able to go and advocate to IGN to kind of soften the landing. And so I want to say that I think I saw like a tweet or a quote from one of the editorial staff at IGN, not from this layoff, but maybe another, that said, the guild couldn't prevent me from being laid off, but they did go and negotiate on my behalf so that I got a better deal than I would have gotten had they not been around. And so, and that is a theme that I've also heard recurring across like the layoffs at Microsoft with Bethesda and that union, that CWA union intervening as well. Ziff Davis, right, so the parent company of IGN, has a long-standing history in tech and video game media dating back to its origins as a magazine publisher in the 1920s. The company became a major force in tech journalism during the 1980s and 1990s through iconic print publications like PC Magazine, Computer Gaming World, Electronic Gaming Monthly, and Game Now, which helped shape early consumer coverage of personal computing and gaming revolution. So, for people who are watching this video or in the live chat, like this is the era that like I come from, and like the stuff that I grew up reading, like this magazine age and the magazines that were kind of important, and that heavily frames like my perspective on how I look at the gaming press today and the gaming media, which I think unfortunately is a shortfall, right, from some of these previous magazines as institutions that we used to have. As the media landscape shifted, Ziff Davis transitioned from print to digital, gradually selling or shuttering its legacy magazines while acquiring and building online properties such as IGN, PC Mag, and Extreme Tech. Under its digital-first strategy, Ziff Davis has continued to expand its portfolio through acquisitions, reinforcing its presence in tech, gaming, and lifestyle media. In recent years, however, its aggressive expansion has been accompanied by rounds of layoffs across its brands, as we are seeing today, raising concerns about the sustainability of its cost-cutting tactics amid continued investment in new properties. So Thrifty mentions, the reason I stopped going to IGN is a comment section, just nothing but negativity, no matter what the article is about. Yes, Thrifty, I totally agree with you. For a very long time, I've felt that it was like of zero value to go into the comment section on IGN. But also I typically don't need to go to the comment section on IGN because that's the exact type of stuff that mostly gets posted on Twitter. So it's kind of just like reading a repeat of people's reactions from the same space that we spend a lot of time in as it is. IGN has had its mix of controversies. Over the years when it has done layoffs, it has had its leadership failures where, we find out about like harassment cases and things like that and how leadership didn't intervene. I think that has been true in different formats and different structures kind of around lots of the gaming media landscape. We have like the whole thing with GameStop's ownership of Game Informer and their shutdown, and unfortunately, their return to the gaming landscape. So, it's not the gaming industry at its core, but it is a part of it. So it's something that I pay attention to. At the end of the day, fortunately or unfortunately, these things do feed into and lead into how people consume the gaming news, because as I mentioned, for a lot of people, it's like the only thing that they know. Unfortunate for those people who got laid off, I do hope that they land on their feet. It's always kind of interesting how when these things go down, fortunately, like there is a network that helps people out, and there is this exchange and cross-pollination of talent and some voices that you may like. I understand that there's lots that you don't, but it was it's always interesting. I'm not sure what the right term is that I want to use, because I don't want to mean to suggest that like it's fortunate that these people got laid off. But it's interesting that like an Imran Khan, right, pops off of IGN and then winds up landing for a moment in time at Kind of Funny Games Daily, or Kind of Funny Games. That Andrew Goldfarb, right, gets laid off from IGN, or maybe left IGN and winds up at KFTV, and then winds up being, at one point he was like a writer in the games industry. I'm not sure. So people rotate around and you become familiar with people, and similar things happen in the tech space. Tom Merritt left CNET way back in the day, and a big podcast that I used to listen to, Buzz Out Loud, and then went to Shut Up on the Twit Network, and then now does his own thing over at can't remember what the name of his show is. Daily Tech or Tech Daily. I'm going to look it up really quickly because it should be right at my fingertips. Tech News Daily? I'm embarrassed now that I can't remember it because I used to listen to it all the time. Daily Tech News Show. Sorry. So, and a lot of those people, right, from CNET and Buzz Out Loud, I've followed around, for a while, so they keep kind of popping up at other places. So, if there are voices that you have come to enjoy, and then hopefully they'll land somewhere else. And regardless, hopefully the people who are affected today land on their feet somewhere. Let's go on to the last news story. And I added this to the rundown. I thought it was interesting because Probably Monsters has come across my windshield a few times in recent history. Is Probably Monsters' unique studio structure sustainable? Probably Monsters' promise of sustainable AAA game design is being put to the test. This news story over at GameDeveloper.com by Brian Francis. And if you're not familiar with GameDeveloper.com, they are the site that used to be Game of Sutra. And so they're very heavily industry leaning. And kind of reporting on, again, some of the deep insight stuff about how the sausage gets made. We obviously won't go through this in its entirety, but in 2016, former Bungie CEO Harold Ryan formed the company Probably Monsters, a new kind of AAA game company that would house multiple game studios, providing centralized services for a number of different types of projects. The plan was for these games to be published by unnamed external partners, spreading out the risks of AAA development while preserving the team sizes needed for big budget games. The company would be a stable home for game developers. That plan has been put to the test over the last 9 years, and the company still hasn't released any games. It shut down 2 projects in 2024 and 2025, despite raising hundreds of millions in funding over the years. Sony Interactive Entertainment purchased one of its subsidiaries, Firewalk Studios, only to shut down the company after its years of development live service shooter Concord launched to dismal sales. Harold also just gave a recent interview, again, with Chris String over on the Game Business Show, so that might be a neat thing to go check out. Now, they are publishing 2 games this year. They will be the first game that's out, and it's very interesting in this time where we're observing dynamics in the gaming industry, and lots of people have commented that, we don't need AAA games, we don't need, $200 million, $300 million budget games. The way this company is getting its 2 games out is one of the things that they've done is they have rethought and restructured how they're going about making games, and they have downscaled. And actually, EA's Andrew Wilson mentioned something about this too. I don't know how likely it is for EA to do this, but their comment was actually about still putting out high quality like AAA games, but putting them out at a slower release cadence. That was their solution. That they make enough money from residual sales and tail sales to be able to afford to give games more time and spread out their release cadence. So again, it's EA, so it's yet to be seen for EA to go about do that, but. You could imagine a world where, EA and its sports franchises, because remember, EA has now split, so there's EA Sports and then there's Electronics Entertainment, and I think Codemasters is over on the Electronic Entertainment side, for instance, and obviously like the Madden studio and the college football studio are over in EA Sports. But, it would be an interesting landscape, right, to have the EA Sports games coming out annually, but then over at Electronic Arts, you have this thing where they're slowing down the cadence and maybe giving their team, I don't know, like an extra 6 months or a year in release cadence and focused on putting out higher quality games at a slower frequency rather than, putting out lower quality games on a more frequent basis. So it's going to be an interesting thing to see. It's going to be interesting to see how different publishers and different studios tackle the problem, which I think the key problem, if I had to put my finger on anything, is that gamers are spending less time in, I don't want to call them, necessarily one and dones, but they're spending less time in content that is not a live service game, right? Whatever that content is, right? An RTS, and it can be an RTS that's a multiplayer game. It can be a first-person shooter, right? That has a multiplayer component to it, or a co-op component to it, or whatever. But it's not a live service game. It's not something wrapped around the business model of a battle pass and a season pass and content drops like Destiny 2. Destiny 2, which has a PvP component, but that PvP component isn't big, right? The thing that got them notoriety were those content drops that drove fire teams, right? And people going off and doing strikes, and dungeons and things like that. Arc Survival, right? That's oriented around content drops. Once human or only human, maybe it's only human. That is the new live service game that again is oriented kind of around that. Destiny 2 Arc Survival model of content drops, and so every publisher has to figure out how to contend with that. And that kind of goes back to what I mentioned earlier in the show, that they're all going to go about it differently. Some of them are going to release their games on multiple platforms. Some of them are going to slow down the release cadence. Some of them are going to de-scope and put out smaller games more frequently. And like I also said kind of earlier in the show, right, the goodness in that is gamers will hopefully get more choice. I was having a talk with Christo Toast on Twitter, and I mentioned, I have this theory that AAA game developers feel like they should be able to charge more for their games, and I think that's maybe the case. Let's just say that they kept margins the same. So you want to keep margins the same. Production costs are constantly spiraling upward. But they do all these gymnastics to not raise the price. They did all these gymnastics to not raise the price to consumers during the 15 years that we held prices static at $60, right? Then we finally raised them to $70, which has caused this kind of, in my belief, this oscillating wave right within the consumer base, because I think we had a flood of gamers who came into the space during the time that gaming prices held steady, even though gaming prices had increased an additional $10 roughly every 8 to 12 years, right, of the console industry history. And so then there became this time where I think people entering the space in particular just thought that prices would never change, and then they did. And I've also said, I also now think that we're going to get to $80 faster because they held prices, right? They didn't keep the kind of gradual ramp that had been going on over time. So what I think is that developers, I think, would have the ability to raise the price on games higher, and that the byproduct of that will be that you'll have a lot of consumers who will finally say, right, because despite all the sturm and drang that we don't need $300 million games, every game doesn't have to be big budget, that consistently proves to be the exact type of game that tends to fill up the NPD charts every month in the top 20. That's the type of game that everybody talks about, despite all of the chatter that we just need to buy indie games and we just need to do this and we just need to do that. They don't get played, they don't get purchased. Again, 18,900 games, not clearing $100,000 on Steam. We have this voice track of things we should be doing, and I'm sorry, just the truth of the matter is, at mass, at scale, at volume, in the market, that's not what happens. And I will firmly say, we're part of the problem. Whether or not you want to look yourself in the mirror and be insulted by that. And again, don't take it as the voice track on social media is reflective of the entire market. When I say we're part of the problem, I mean the entirety of the market, right? Certainly, there's probably people on social media who would immediately assert, I buy indie games. I buy indie games all the time. And I go back to, thanks, you're not the market, right? You're the one person, you're the anecdote, right? We're an incredibly small percentage of what's going on out in the market, in the industry, right, out on the barter exchange system, and you can see what's happening with that reflected in the NPD charts and other data like Newzoo and Statista. So, and there's a reason publishers don't make AA games, because they don't sell in volume, because they don't make the billions of dollars that Call of Duty does, or other AAA games, because they don't chart at 2 or 3 or 4 on the NPD charts like Death Stranding 2 does. So I do think that Nerd says, "Are you trying to say us gamers were insatiable?" Spanish, yes. Yeah, I mean we are. I mean, production costs keep spiraling upward, partially because we're never satisfied, right? And I'm not putting all of that blame on us, right? There's lots of industry talk, and again, I keep pointing back to Rami Ishmael, who's a consultant who goes and helps smaller developers get their games to market, and he says one of the things that needs to stop is if you're a small studio and you put out a game and that game's successful, don't fall down the trap that almost every studio does that says, hey, the next thing we have to do has to be bigger, right? But I will also say, gamers, that's what we demand. On an episode of BRAP, we were having a conversation about, I can't remember, maybe it was Obsidian, because I still hold to this day, the crown jewel of Microsoft acquisitions over the years has been Obsidian. It's not Activision, it's not Bethesda, it's not all these things that get a lot of the airtime. It's Obsidian, right? They are the GOAT, as is proven by the fact that they're the people who are cranking games out while other studios have not gotten games out. And I think he mentioned something. I think this person mentioned something like he expected Obsidian. Yeah, he expected Obsidian to have stepped up, right, as an acquisition. The point of an acquisition is to make, by a larger entity, is to use those financial resources to make those studios better. Now, I will say, you look at Housemarque over at PlayStation Studios, and I will say Housemarque is, I talk about the 6 S-tier studios at PlayStation, and I've recently started now talking about that as 6.5, because I think Housemarque is from what I'm seeing, is maybe hitting that point where it's going to cross over and become a 7th S-tier studio. But what I will say, and my pushback on this person when they mentioned the thing about Obsidian, is I said, it's understand that, particularly in the creative space, that when a studio gets acquired, you look at Double Fine, and there are studios that have as an absolute part of their charter that, hey, if we go through with this acquisition, we're not going to let it change who we are, right? We're going to stay the same. And I have the utmost respect for Obsidian, that they choose products at a specific scale. They don't follow that slippery slope, right? That, oh my God, the next thing we have to do has to be bigger. Obsidian has been making the same type and style and scope of game for a very long time. And I don't have any problem with that, because I love an Obsidian joint. I don't need Outer Worlds 2 to be Starfield, right? I didn't need Avowed to be Skyrim. And I think we got great games from Obsidian because they maintain that scope and that vision, and I think they've maintained the type of studio that they want to be. So I don't necessarily know that, yes, it's neat to see some studios get acquired and kind of step up, right, from the infusion of additional financial resources, but I don't think every studio has to do that. And I think it's completely fine for studios to kind of maintain their identity and their heart, that has become synonymous with the spirit of that studio over time, because that's why we fell in love with them in the first place, right? And it's fine. I could also say, by the same token, Housemarque is a studio that we probably looked at, and we've probably always said, what would happen if Housemarque were owned by a multi-billion-dollar company? What could they do with their talent? So I think those things are fine. So all of these things will be interesting to see how each of these companies kind of bends and shifts, right, to deal with the changing landscape, and hopefully, like I said, we as consumers will benefit and maybe hopefully some of them will start kind of descoping and putting out smaller titles more frequently, and hopefully there will be a market for them, and we won't see what we saw kind of in the turn of the corner from the aughts to the teens, where we kind of have wound up seeing like the erosion of double A games, because like I said, big publishers have become less and less interested in producing that content because it doesn't sell. So I think that's gonna do it for tonight. We will do another episode Friday evening is the plan, and of course, I think the shtick is becoming, if Friday evening doesn't work out, then I'll push the episode till Saturday. So thanks so much for everybody who happened to come through the chat and watch the live stream. So thanks so much, Soil Tech, Ghostface Killa, Innate, Nerds of Legends, and Thrifty. Hope I didn't miss anyone. So I appreciate you coming through as always. For anybody who watches the video on demand of this in the rerun on the Rounding Off Infinity gaming channel on YouTube, please feel free to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you can just receive a notification whenever I post new content. Until next time, take care of yourselves, stay safe out there, play the games you like, come here to talk to me about the games that you love. Once again, my name has been Game Logic from the Rounding Off Infinity gaming channel on YouTube, one of the co-hosts of the Enough to Keep Going weekly video games podcast on the E2KG Network podcasting channel on YouTube. Until next time, good night, good luck, and good gaming. That's going to do it for me. I'm out of here.